Ladies and gentlemen, get the book Dr. Joshua Bowen wrote, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. It is extremely full of knowledge and information for anyone, as well as join the Patreon. There's hundreds of videos that have been not released to the internet. You can ask questions and I will record them with these scholars in high definition. I do that all the time. You can also personal message me and you help the community grow. Thanks a lot. Megan Lewis, what are some problems with the ancient aliens? Maybe we can talk about Sitchens and just the ideas in general. We won't necessarily need to get stuck on some type of extraterrestrials floating out there. But the basis is supposedly Sitchens is reading this ancient Sumerian and he has interpreted that these extraterrestrials create humans to mine the earth of minerals to go to their own
spaceships.
Oh, yep. Yeah. So. Yep. But tell us maybe some problems with it, also how he got things wrong.
Sure. So Ancient Aliens first, generally, especially if you're familiar with the History Channel show, people who subscribe to these theories generally cherry pick their evidence and misrepresent what they do take. So quite often, especially on the show, you'll have people presented as experts who have little to no training, formal or otherwise, in the field that they're purportedly an expert in. You have people speaking wildly outside of their own actual training. And then you have the evidence they present is very poorly, they lie, essentially. I was trying super hard not to say that, but they lie. And there's one episode that I went through and methodically, that's the word, methodically checked out. And the sites that they use, they're using either outdated information or they're completely ignoring archaeological reports that tell you information that we know. And it's just presented as this huge, big, sparkly mystery, and it must be aliens. No, actually. Or they look at something and they claim that it's far, far earlier in time than it actually was. And when you go back and look at the actual evidence, there's very good evidence to date it to much, much later in time. So just a couple of small issues that you often see with that kind of material. And one overarching problem that you do have to keep in mind is that a lot of the time, these theories are rooted either consciously or otherwise, they're rooted in a kind of white supremacy, racist mindset. The general sense is that white people didn't make these structures. If you think specifically about things like the pyramids, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia and of Mesoamerica, white people didn't do them. White people weren't doing these kinds of amazing things at a comparable time period. Therefore, indigenous people, brown people, black people could not have done these at the time that archaeology says they did. So it must have been aliens. Okay. Completely ignoring the fact that, especially if you look at Egypt, we have records of how, specifically instructions of how they made the pyramids. We have super clear records of that kind of thing. We know, archaeologists, historians know how people built things, when they did it, why they did it. Very well documented. No aliens. If you look specifically at Mesopotamia, Zecharia Sitchin is probably the most famous proponent of alien theories. He wrote a series of, I think, 12 books or something, looking at a multitude of different evidence, looking at mythology and archaeology and cylinder seals and imagery and all kinds of stuff that he very neatly kind of ties in a bow and says, oh, well, the gods in Mesopotamia weren't actually gods. They were aliens who came to Earth, essentially created humanity, created civilization, and used us as miners to mine for gold to power their spaceships. Okay. Aside from the quite obvious problems that I would have as an historian with people looking at texts that are very clearly mythological, allegorical, etiological, and taking them as straight up history, even with texts that you could consider history or historical, you do not take them at face value, ever. That's just that's like reading an email composed by Trump's campaign manager and saying, oh, this must all be 100% truth, 100% historical fact. I mean, equally, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit. Reading an email from Biden's campaign manager, oh, it's 100% true, 100% historical. No, people frame things, people choose the information they share with you for a very specific reason. Just because it's written down doesn't make it true, doesn't make it history. Like, that's just not how things work. And that's essentially what Sitchin does. He takes texts that are very clearly literary, very clearly stories, and says, well, this is either straight up history, or this is like an allegorical retelling of alien battle, or how spaceships landed in Mesopotamia, which is fascinating just from an intellectual standpoint, but really doesn't bear any. It doesn't have any bearing in like reality, or at least historical reality that we can uncover. And something that we're often asked, and I get an email about this maybe once a month, asking, did Sitchin know Sumerian? Or was he just a fraud? Which is actually a really complicated question. In his books, he does go into an awful lot of detail about, like I said, specific myths, looking at the Sumerian language. And if you didn't know any better, you'd assume that he knows how Sumerian works and he can read Sumerian, or he could. He sadly passed away, or that he could read Sumerian. Now, whether or not he could is honestly difficult to answer. Sitchin was writing in like the early 19th century. Yes, sorry, I get the centuries mixed up. In the 1900s.
So 20th century.
Yes, not the 19th century. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is why we have you here.
It's okay. Don't worry. When I'm wrong, I promise you'll know it.
But he was writing in like 1900. He was born in 1920s, and Assyriology really isn't that old of a field. Like, we haven't been around for very long. Sumerian and Akkadian weren't deciphered like hundreds of years ago, like classical Greek and Latin were, even Middle Egyptian. So the field has been moving very, very fast as people research it, as we learn more about the texts, about how grammar works, really intricate stuff. It advances our knowledge super, super fast. So he was working really kind of early in the discipline's history. So his knowledge of Sumerian just factually would not be as complete as, say, my knowledge, having been educated like in the past decade, because we've had so many advances in the field. So it is entirely possible, therefore, that he was reading the texts with the information that he had available to him at that point in time, and he honestly thought that the readings he was coming up with were accurate. I find that unlikely, but I wish to be generous, and I obviously never met the man, so I can't say definitively, oh yes, he's 100% charlatan. The problem that you have when you look at his understanding of Sumerian is that he doesn't seem to really have any kind of grasp of how the grammar works. So, Sumerian makes verbs by essentially stringing syllables together to make what we call verbal chains. So you have the verb usually located at the end of that chain. So we'll say do three is the verb which means to build. And the three just means that it is the third cuneiform sign with the phonetic value do. There are loads of cuneiform signs that mean do. They all have different syntactic values. So do three means to build. And you see this a lot in royal inscriptions. I, the king, for this particular god, built this temple. I do threed this temple. It just means I built this temple for this god. So in front of the verb, you have other cuneiform signs, other syllables that give you information, kind of like conjugation, a verbal conjugation. It'll tell you like the tense, it'll tell you the person, whether it was like first, second, third person, I did it, you did it, he did it, whether it's one or two, like I did it, we did it, that kind of thing. So if you look at the verb ga'an do three, it's a very specific verb. It is a verb. It means let me build. You've got do 3 at the end. We know that that means to build. Ga is the cohortative marker. It means let me. So let me build. And an is like the person marker. So pretty straightforward, right? Good. The problem is that ga, an also by themselves can be taken as nouns. The verb, the word ga, the sign for ga, can also mean milk. Interesting, cool. The sign an can also mean a specific god, the sky god, or it can just be a marker of divinity. It goes before a specific god's name to let people know that you're talking about a divinity, or it can just mean God. So what Sitchin would do if he was confronted with this verbal form, he wouldn't take it as a verb necessarily, or at least not the conjugation that I would or that Josh would. He would say milk, sky, milk, God. One of the readings of an is also sky, so he'd say milk, sky, build. It's the Milky Way, which is really interesting, but it's not what is written in Sumerian. It's not what that Sumerian means, especially in whatever context you might find it in. And you see this quite a lot in his writing. And I don't have specifics because it's been a while since I read the books, but I remember that his reading of the word that he thought was like a rocket ship included the word. It was like a verbal form that contained the word for dagger, which he thought would look like a rocket, like a silver rocket flying through the sky, which is fascinating and super inventive, but it's not what that means. And again, it's entirely possible he genuinely thought that he was translating accurately. It's also possible he just had a really interesting story and felt like making some money off selling alien books.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot. The whole, and you said, just this whole idea that he thinks the gods, what I think is interesting about the story is that the gods are always depicted as up in the sky. And if they did come down, well, there's aliens, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing I think about it is Sitchens is coming up in a time in which there is this phenomena of extraterrestrials coming up on the scene. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody's talking about this in the 1500s. Mm-hmm. Nobody's like, the aliens are coming. Like, fiction is now playing a huge role. Yeah. You've got a lot of people talking about other creatures from other planets coming in, and they're writing fictional stories. And it's in the air. It's in the milieu.
Absolutely. And like, I'm the biggest science fiction nerd. I love it. I love stories about aliens. I love like Star Trek. Beautiful. Fantastic. Makes me very happy. But trying to then map that onto a very human past, specifically, and people are going to roll their eyes at this, but specifically a past populated by primarily black and brown people, is kind of, it's a little uncomfortable, if we're very honest, because no one is looking at Stonehenge and saying, oh, well, aliens. Mm. It's taken as read, really, that was the product of humanity. And it's an amazing monument and an amazing feat of engineering and transporting that rock from like Wales down to southern England. Whoa, that's fantastic. No one questions that as the mark of, or as the achievement of a white European nation or people group, because it wasn't a nation, as a white European people group. But you look at the pyramids, fantastic feat of engineering, beautifully made, wonderful. And not the immediate assumption, but a very strong assumption for many, many people is that, it couldn't have been built by humans. It must have, or at least not the humans who were living there. It must therefore have been aliens.
Or the massive stones in Rome building of their temples. Mm-hmm. There are some stones that are ridiculous. Yeah. And people would say, well, they were very They were just
super intelligent.
Yeah. But here you can't allow the pyramids. It's just too much.
Right.
I have family that thinks aliens a lot, right? Now, they don't consciously think the way that you described
that.
Right.
And I'm not trying to say that all people who hold to ancient astronaut theories are inherently racist. Definitely not what I'm saying.
I think they're mistaken, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that it is interesting to think about why these theories are placed on the regions, the geographical regions that they are placed upon, and why, like you said, we don't see them with classical civilizations. We don't see it with like the Norse. I deliberately or otherwise, it is my opinion that there's a very strong racial component there. And this is not like, I haven't spent a ton of time researching this. If people are interested, there are fantastic scholars and researchers actively working on like debunking ancient alien theories and saying, look, this is why it's wrong. And I can give you details of those for the description if people are interested. But finally, one massive problem with ancient alien theorists and with debunking ancient alien theories is that the people who come up with these pick information from all over the civilization that they're working with, which is really difficult then for academics to debunk. Because when you're an academic, typically what you do is you have a very narrow focus as your own personal speciality. You look at one thing in one time period or one thing across some time periods. You don't say research cylinder seal iconography and Sumerian literature and Mesopotamian building practices. You might have a knowledge of them, but you can't, or you don't feel comfortable talking in depth about all of those things. So being able to debunk theories that draw very heavily on all of those aspects, you need either a very wide knowledge or you need several different people to work with you, which is very tricky. And it means that when academics are approached with alien theories, they can obviously debunk most of it, but then at least when I do it, there are a couple of things I'm like, look, I know this isn't right. I can't right now present you with evidence for why it's not right. Give me some time, I'll go away, find something. But then the responses are, well, you can't prove me wrong right here, right now, therefore I'm right.
I think it's interesting too, in light of what you say, you know, they're jumping from, we'll go from Giza, then we're in Malaysia, then we're in South America, like that. And it's like, whoa, do you know how many different real experts in those particular fields you would have to properly assess this? And all you have is a guy with a drone who has a lot of money backed up by a documentary series on TV who's flying it over, and they have a little tribal guy who has a myth that he can come on and go, you know, long ago my ancestors said, and it's like, ooh, and then the myth is
aliens.
sold. And they make it as aliens. But what I found interesting, I think I saw a YouTube video where someone was doing a response debunking some of this, and he's like, half of the time, I don't have a number, but let's just say like half the time, these sites that they love going to where they go, and the mysteries of this and that, like 100 feet over there's a quarry, and there's some tools that we have found in that quarry that are human tools to show you, just so you know, they actually made this. There's no reason to say aliens came down and used the resources here to try and find a way to...
In Egypt, we have pictures showing them constructing the pyramids. Like, we know how they did that. It's not a secret. In Mesopotamia, we have like reliefs, carved images of people in a quarry making these giant statues. Like people making them, not aliens making them. And another thing that the ancient astronaut theorists love to do is like find things that look kind of the same all over the world and say, oh, look, this is the same in this and this and this and this. And the obvious one is with pyramids. Like there are pyramid-shaped structures in a lot of different civilizations. It's like, coincidence? I think not. Well, actually, pyramids are just one of the easiest shapes to build. They're the most stable structures you can make if you feel like making a giant monument. Like if you give a toddler a bunch of bricks, odds are at some point they're going to build a pyramid because it won't fall down again. It's not that weird. And if you're looking at things like iconography and you're picking out in different civilizations the same imagery, well, that's not terribly surprising. If you look at like the different modern cultures, most of us have some kind of like human-shaped doll figure that we give to small children to play with. Is that a sign of aliens? No, it's a sign that we like making representative toys for our kids.
And at best, I mean, let's suppose that going far enough back that somehow we learned and taught these things, and this is just passed down. I don't know if there's any pre-Ice Age potential to someone knowing anything. Don't know. That's totally speculative. But I just say it's like you don't need to add the ad hoc proposition to be true. I do think this is an interesting discussion. They would probably, as apologists, I'm using this analogy, they would probably run and go, well, okay, we'll grant that humans were cutting the stones, but to move them, it takes anti-gravity technology or some crazy, and then what is this symbol on the wall? And then they'll say, doesn't that look like some type of light beam for, there's just so many things I've heard, like where the pyramids are placed on Earth, that place has healing potential or like energy levels, and it's like
they're arranged along ley lines, or you can if you have a picture of the world, you can draw lines between the pyramids. I'm like, of course you can. It's straight lines. From one point to another, you can make it a straight line. It doesn't mean anything. And I see why people do it. We really love seeing patterns in stuff, and it's interesting. But I think it's much more interesting and much more exciting that actually you consider the fact that ancient cultures were that amazing. They were that intelligent. Their engineering was that advanced that they could make things like this. Mm-hmm. I couldn't make a giant pyramid. I wouldn't know where to start. And they made these beautiful monuments, and we go ahead and ascribe it to aliens in the sky. It's like, no, humans are amazing and inventive. We're super cool. Just accept that.
I saw a meme, and we'll end on this if that's cool with you. Maybe you could comment on it, is what I'm saying. There's videos that go viral, and I can't stop watching them when I see them. 2 little brown-skinned South American men with sticks, literally sticks, and a bucket maybe. And they go to this little spot in the middle of the jungle, and they start cutting holes in the ground, and they start shaping it, and then they start digging this little it looks like some Aztecian type of underground, vacation spot with its own little pools and sod and slides into. Have you ever seen any of those?
I haven't, but indigenous knowledge is really impressive. Just what indigenous peoples can do with the lands that they were born into, and it's really cool. And the ancient people were the same. Mm-hmm. The people are really clever. I'm not really clever. I couldn't do that. They can, because they have the knowledge and they've been taught how to do it.